Well, again, good morning to you guys. And like Jennifer said earlier, yes, I am missing hugs big time. I'm missing being in the front foyer on the way out. But hey, this too shall pass. All right. We're going to endure this, make the most of it. And so I'm glad that you're here today. And also those that are watching online, we just welcome you. However you are, wherever you are today, we just thank you for being here. We're continuing our sermon series on stories. We're just kind of pulling out some Old Testament, New Testament stories and trying to dig in and dive in to maybe find some application. How does this fit my life? What is God trying to say, not just to them then, but what is He trying to say to me today in this world, in this life? And there's a story, it's called 10 Lepers. It's a miracle that Jesus performed and that I felt like was very timely today and even for this season. And so let's just dig right in because we have a lot to kind of work through with the limited amount of time this morning. Luke chapter 17, beginning in verse 11. As Jesus continued toward Jerusalem, he reached the border between Galilee and Samaria. And remember, just as we understand that Samaria and the Samaritans, they really didn't get along with the Jews. They were just kind of the outcasts. They just, hey, we don't like you. They don't like us. So there was a dividing line. So every time you hear or see, Samaria or the Samaritans, then you think, okay, well, they didn't get along. They didn't like each other. So Jesus was very intentional about stepping across whatever divide that was. Was it culture, race, all these sorts of things? He was very intentional in saying, no, we're all equal, right? We're all humans, and we're all on the same level here. And so as verse 12 says, as he entered a village there, 10 men with leprosy stood at a distance because that's what they were required to do by law, crying out, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. And he looked at them and he said, go show yourselves to the priest. And as they went, they were cleansed of their leprosy. So real quick, you just kind of imagine yourself kind of in this situation. Jesus performed miracles in different ways. Sometimes he touched them, sometimes even the lepers. There was a time where he touched the lepers and healed them. This time he shouted from a distance and allowed the Holy Spirit to kind of heal them. So that's the power of Jesus. It doesn't have to be there, right, in person to touch you and change you. But as they're walking, one of them looked at each other and was like, hey, we're changing. We're not broken anymore. We're being restored. And so they were healed as they were going to show themselves to the priest. He was being very clear because I think intentional. He was going to say, I want you to go to the priest because they needed to check in with the priest in order to be declared clean again, to return to their families, to return home. But he also wanted to make sure that they were healed before they got to the priest. Because it wasn't the priest who was going to heal them, right? It was the power of Jesus and the power of God that was going to heal them. In verse 15, one of them, when he saw that he was healed, came back to Jesus, shouting, "Praise God!" And then he fell to the ground at Jesus' feet, thanking him for what he had done. This man, it makes it clear, was a Samaritan. And we assume that maybe most of the others, if not all the others, based on what Jesus is going to say in just a few minutes, is that maybe this is the only one who's Samaritan, so that kind of catches him off guard. And then Jesus asked, "Did I heal 10 men? Where are the other 9? And has no one returned to give glory to God except this foreigner?" So he's kind of calling and says, maybe this is the only foreigner. Maybe this is the only Samaritan. Everyone else was Jews. We don't know that. We can just kind of read between the lines. And Jesus said to the man, "Stand up and go. Your faith has healed you." And so this line I want to kind of focus on and camp on for just a second to be on the screen for you. Only one leper returned to seek the who and the why behind the miracle. There's one thing you can understand about lepers. If you've grown up in church, you've heard probably this message. You've heard what see and all that. So I'm going to get into all the details and the gory details because hopefully you're going to have an appetite afterwards, okay? But what you need to know is it kind of started with the eyelids and then the palms. And it would start with these specks. I don't want you to get nervous, right? Okay, but it started there and it started here, these specks. And so if you can imagine in that time, if someone's looking at you and they see specks on your eyelids, they get kind of nervous, right? And if you're looking down at your hands and you see specks on your hands and you can't wash them off, you get a little nervous. And it begins to start that way. And all of a sudden, it begins to kind of develop these boils, and it develops all this stuff, and it just causes your bodies to decay. And the biggest thing is it kind of takes away your nervous system and attacks your nervous system. So when you see the hands curled up and gross things happening, what would happen is they would lose limbs. It's not because it was decaying and falling off, but essentially because they couldn't feel their hands anymore. And so you think about it, there's things you do when you go, okay, I'm going to touch that, it's hot or whatever, and you feel that it's hot and you touch it, but if you couldn't feel any pain, think about some of the things you do and stubbing your toe in the middle of the night, all those sorts of things. All these things are happening and they're losing their nervous system, they're causing boils to kind of happen on their body. So their body is literally decaying right before their eyes. And so all of that's happening to them, and so it's not just a physical ailment that they're having to endure, and there's not an antibiotic, there's not anything kind of treatment in those days. They're just cast away. And so if you are declared to have leprosy, you are kicked out of society. You have to go to your own community. Sometimes there was like these lepers islands. And so this community, apparently there's these 10 men, there's probably more in the community, but there's these 10 men, and they had heard that there was this Jesus coming through. And so I would assume that there's more lepers in that community, but 10 of these men said, you know what, we're just going to take a chance. And so they get out of this community and they want to kind of reach out. They call out to him. They have mercy. And they call out to him and Jesus speaks to them immediately and heals them. And then as the story says, one of them turns around as they're walking and realizes that he's healed. And he turns around immediately and goes back to Jesus. There's where this who. I believe that this one wanted to find out who had the power to change me. Who had the power to do this? Now, obviously they had, because their faith in him helped them to believe that they could be healed. But there's a difference in healing faith, we want to get specific, and then saving faith, right? So they wanted to kind of see, okay, is there more to this? This one wanted to know, there's got to be more to this guy. And I love what R.C. Sproul said. He makes an interesting comment about this healing. He says, the interpretation that I have heard again and again is that although Jesus healed 10 lepers, only one of them was grateful. I don't believe that for one moment. He continues, if we have any understanding of what a leper went through, we would know that not even the most corrupt or crass sinner could fail to be grateful for this healing. When these lepers saw that their flesh had been restored, that this marvelous healer Jesus had done his work, no doubt they began leaping for joy and couldn't wait to go home to be reunited with their families. And that would be the normal thing to do. So 9 out of the 10 went straight home. Now, why is that interesting? Why do we kind of specify that? Because we don't want to dismiss, and I'm growing up hearing that same kind of thing, that you usually teach on this parable or this miracle in this story, and we talk about gratitude. I've done that before. But to me, it's bigger than this. Yes, he came back grateful. But you don't understand what these guys have been through. They've been without their families. They've been outcast from society. They've been outcast from their jobs, their careers. And with the men out of the picture from the families, there's not any system in place to care for their families. So when they lost their father, when they lost their husband, their son, then who's caring for them? Who's taking for them? So these men couldn't wait to get back home, not just for their loved ones to find comfort and to not feel lonely anymore, to be part of that, but to also, hey, I have a responsibility, I have a duty. So there's a lot of things going through their minds and their hearts. And again, it's not that they didn't celebrate. Wouldn't you celebrate? Won't we celebrate when this virus that we don't want to name right now is gone? Somebody? Aren't we? I saw a meme on Facebook, right? It's where we find all the good stuff, right? We're going to take the mask when all this is over and throw it up like graduation day or caps, right? So we understand on a small scale. And what we're experiencing, what we're going through, we can't even compare to what these guys were going through. Know that they were grateful. But understand that this one, even though he had responsibilities, even though he couldn't wait to get back to his family and get back to his life, he paused for a second. He said, you know what? I want to find out who did this. I want to get to know this who. Do we want to know the who behind what God is doing? You see, there's somebody protecting us. There's someone loving us. There's someone that died for us. Are we interested, or are we just sometimes just going through life and just almost like, well, God owes this to me. God owes me another breath, right? God owes me this blessing. God owes me this paycheck. God owes me this job. God owes me this day. God owes me my freedom, right? We always kind of, if we just take it for granted, do we really just come back and pause and say, God, thank you? Or are we like the other 9 sometimes? We're just like, well, thank you for doing that, and we don't turn around. There's also the why. I think he was interested, for me, I'm interested in why. Why heal these? Because obviously we know that there was people and there was lepers and there were situations and hurts and situations that circumstances that God didn't intervene through through Jesus in his time on this earth. So why them? I think it was all about a message. It was all about being specific to these people for whatever reason. And I think it really came down for me it was about loving the lonely. Can you imagine anyone more lonely than someone who had leprosy in that day and age? Can you imagine anyone that's hurting and that's missing out on community, that's missing out on people, that's missing out on anyone? See, the only thing that bound those and binded those people was the fact that they had this disease. They shared this disease. So why would Jesus intervene? Why would Jesus touch them? There's such a thing that people are facing today, and maybe some of you kind of relate to this. It's called relational poverty. And we understand what material poverty is, that we don't have enough things, just our needs, right, aren't being met. So that's poverty, when we're longing for our daily bread, as we talked about last week. But when we talk about relational poverty, it's being without the most essential emotional connection, the most essential people. There's not any intimacy in our life. There's not any meaningful relationship, that we're missing out, and we have this great sense and this deep sense of loneliness. And there's some of you who've been in this situation before. It may not be a prolonged relational poverty, but maybe you found yourself in a crowd. Maybe you find yourself today. You're in this crowd of people. You look around and there's people all over. But for whatever reason, you're feeling lonely. Maybe you're walking around and you're going through your job and you say, well, would anybody notice if I wasn't here, right? We go through those things, and if we're not careful, if we're not connected, then we're going to hurt. Jan Rhodes sent me this week. Reached out to her about this because that's kind of some of the stuff that she worked through back in her career. And she told me about this experiment that happened in the medieval times. And it's kind of morbid, okay? I want to just kind of warn you. But there's a bigger picture. And I don't want to focus on the morbid part of it too long. But Frederick II, and he called this the language deprivation experiment. Now, what he was trying to do, the basis of this was, okay, he believed that there was some human language that happened between Adam and Eve and God in the garden. That, we don't know what language they were speaking. We don't know that. We just know that they communicated, right? God came and visited them. They walked and they talked and they socialized. I'd imagine they hugged and they fellowshiped and they kind of hung out, right? So what was that language that they spoke? Was it a spoken language? Was it an unspoken? We just don't know. So that's what he was trying to figure out. So what he did, and this is where we get kind of morbid and really sad, is that he said, okay, I'm going to do this experiment. And he took 5 babies from birth, and he said, okay, we're not going to have any contact. There's no emotional contact, no physical contact, so you can kind of use your imagination, feeding them from a distance, taking care of them from a distance. There's no touching going on, at least from the skin. Everything's gloves, there's no talking, no communication, no reading to them, no singing to them. Think about sad, right? So all of that's happening. But the experiment backfired, because what he thought was going to happen is that some language would develop and that these babies would understand, right? They would realize that there's human beings caring for me, even though they're not communicating with me, they're not interacting with me in any way, but there would be some kind of unspoken language. The problem was there wasn't, and it backfired immensely. You see, all 5 babies after 3 years were dead. And that's the morbid part. And let me fast forward through that. Here's what was learned in that. Is that we, as humans, not only need human interaction. We just assume, well, babies, no. We need human interaction. And if we don't have interaction, if we don't have communication, if we don't have intimacy, we truly are incomplete. We cannot function. We cannot live without sharing life. And so you think about the interaction that you have on a daily basis that you take for granted. Even those that may live alone, you think about the phone calls, you think about the interaction with the neighbors, and you think about all that's happening. And think about the interaction that's built up to your life now, that's developed you into who you are. See, God understands that. He's made us relational. He's made us in such a way that we need people. We need interaction. We need communion with God and also with people. So what causes loneliness in the most developed countries? Some studies that have been out there, and I'll work through these pretty quickly. Number one is the breakdown of families. So what's causing us to be more lonely in today's age is that there's a breakdown of families. And we understand what this is. Whether it's divorce or someone just dies too early or whatever happens in life. But we have this, and if those families don't handle that correctly, right? If you don't handle that correctly, if you don't say, we couldn't live together, but hey, we're going to be there for you. All these sorts of things. There's a great divide. Then what's going to happen is there's this breakdown of families, and if you're constantly going at it with each other, and then who's left? Taking the scraps of attention and affection. It's those kids, right? And I've been there. I understand what that looks like. And thankfully, my parents worked through this. And they said, hey, we're not going to get along. We can't make it, but you guys are a priority. And would I have wished it and hoped that we'd have been together? Yes, that's ideal. But for us and my brother and I, we had a blessed life because they made it a priority to make us a priority. The breakdown of families. Number two, increased mobility. And that does not mean faster cars and more vehicles. What it's talking about is we're in a generation now, and probably my generation kind of started with my parents a little bit, and then my generation kind of came along and said, hey, we're not going to just all stay where we grew up. And there's nothing wrong with that, all right? There's nothing wrong with that. But what we do see is that there's more mobility as far as families. There's more families that have said, okay, we can't find jobs there, or we're just going to go off to college somewhere else, experience life, and then they settled there. So we have more families that are scattered, right? And so when you think about it, if you scatter, but you don't plug in and connect where you settled, what's going to happen? You're going to be lonely. And you're always longing for what you had, and you're never going to have that. You've got to connect, and that's what we had to be very intentional because we loved our life in Georgia. We loved having family. But we had to plug in here 16 years ago, right? And now, this is family. And my family gets upset. Grandmother, I'm sorry because my grandmother watches, okay? So I love you dearly, okay? But at some point, you've got to plug in. You've got to connect where you are. And then thirdly, heavy workloads. What this means is it doesn't mean that the work is harder. It just means that bosses and companies and organizations will require more of their employees than they used to in the past. When you talk about hours and you talk about expectations and efficiency and responsibilities. And if you're not careful, and if we're not careful, we don't unplug from work. We take it with us. A couple years ago, when we built a house in a neighborhood here in the community, a good friend of mine, Bill, was out there and we kind of showing the place, and we had this speed bump that's now no longer there, so I have to mentally remember that. But he told me, he said, Brian, what I want you to do is when you hit that speed bump, when you come in to your neighborhood, you hit that speed bump, that's your sign to unplug. Everything that just happened at work, everything that's happening at church, everything that's happening outside, okay, it's over with. It's behind you. So now what's priority now is your family. Okay? And so when you're coming back to work, and hey, same thing, all right? You hit that, it's a reset. Now you're back and you're focused. And I think we need to figure out, okay, how, if that's happening, if we're guilty of that, if we have some workaholics kind of among us in our families, and if we have a trouble disengaging from our responsibilities, and it's always nagging at us, then that's going to contribute to loneliness of those who need our sometimes undivided attention. And fourthly and lastly, the rise of social media. Basically, what's happening with social media is what we've been talking about for a while. That if we're not careful, if we don't use it for what it should be used for, just to keep up with people and encourage people, and brag on each other and all this kind of stuff. Not brag on ourselves, but brag on each other, right? But if we just see it for the false side, right? For that side that is unhealthy, this is going to contribute to loneliness. If we're constantly comparing, right, someone else's highlight reel to our behind the scenes, then we're going to feel lonely because we feel like we didn't get included. We don't feel important. We don't feel valued. I didn't get as much likes. I didn't get as much views, and all these sorts of things. We share space with plenty of people in our life. And if we're not intentional about having real relationships, talking about real things beyond just the vague conversations, if we don't dig deep and have some intimacy with people, not just within our family, but outside of our family, if we don't have that, then we will eventually experience something that they're calling relational poverty. There's a lady by the name of Esther on Kim, and she included this prayer, this line in her prayer on a daily basis, and I thought I'd challenge you because it challenged me. She said, "Who do you want me to love for you today?" What a great prayer. What a great thing to kind of include in my prayer life when I come to God and say, "Okay, God, what do you want me to do for you today?" And I would imagine that Jesus prayed something like this on a daily basis. They went to his Father because they were in constant communication, and he carved out time and said, "Okay, God, what is it that you want me to do today? Where do you want me to go today? We're in Galilee, we're in Samaria. Do you want me to cross the line and break some cultural boundaries? Do I need to go to Jerusalem? Who do you want me to love today? And help me not to miss it." Understand this. These 10 lepers were not on his agenda that day. So he was coming into this region. He was going to Jerusalem. He was going to do whatever he was going to do in Jerusalem. And so as he's going that way, all of a sudden these people interrupt him, right? They interrupt him. And they call out for mercy. Can you imagine how many people, especially as Jesus kind of progressed in his ministry, were calling out to him, wanting something from him? And can you imagine how tempting it would be for you and I if we ever got to that place and something like that where we had something to offer that people really wanted, and it's all about attention, and it's all about calls, and it's all about texts, and we're just constantly bombarded? If you're not careful, you become calloused to all that because you're interrupting what I'm supposed to be doing today. And it's the same thing with young families, and even I would imagine grandparents sometimes, where young families, you're trying to get dinner ready, right? And then what happens? Those kids, they're not going to wait patiently for dinner to get ready, right? What are they doing? "Mom, what's for dinner? Mom, when's it going to be ready?" Right? You ever taken a road trip? We're at the end of the summer, right? Road trips, all right? You're 16 hours away. You just pulled out of the driveway. When are we going to get there? How long are we going to get? How long is it going to be before we get there? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Sally's touching my side of the car, right? What are we going to eat? Where's the snack bag? All these sorts of things. And it's just nagging. And if we're not careful, we get so wrapped up in life, we get so wrapped up in what we're doing, where we're going, that we lose sight many times that if we feel like someone is crying out for help, someone's crying out for just some kind of connection, some kind of encouragement, if we're not careful, instead of us being open to what God is leading us to do and being loving, that we get so short-fused and earthbound focused that we get so frustrated with all of this, and we lose sight of what God is wanting to do in his realm. Jesus took the time to hear what they were requesting and say to them from a distance, "I got you. Just go show the priest. Go see him." Who do you want me to love for you today? So how do we love the lonely? Just a couple of points here. We love through making a connection to begin with. Over in Matthew 8, Jesus touched the leper, and he healed him by touching him. In this instance, he touched him from a distance. And what I pull from that is, and what I find very relatable in this season, is that I'll just be honest with you. Early on in this junk, right? Early on, I felt helpless. I felt like, well, what I'm supposed to do is be there with people, right? I can't be there with people if I'm not, right, with them. And so, how do we do that? If I can't interact, if we can't engage around circled tables down here, if we can't, then what is ministry? What am I supposed to do in this? And so what God helped me through this season and what God reminded me in this is that, yeah, there are times when we can be present with someone, and that's powerful. And there's no substitute for that, right? But if we can't, for whatever reason, Jesus determined that, okay, we're gonna do this from a distance, that he did that from a distance. Either way, he helped them. He cared for them. He was compassionate for them. So what we have to determine in this time and in this season is how can we love and how can we make a connection with people even though we can't be with the people all the time. And you begin to kind of think about the people who we can at least reach out to from a distance. I think about the new college students that are starting out, and not just the ones that are going to SFA, the ones that have moved off. I mean, when we hear about those, can't we just send a card? Can't we just find out their number and send a text? Can't we just make that connection? Because if you went off to college and you changed towns, right, you had some mobility in that, you knew what it was like to start a new season, a new adventure, a new place. What about the caregivers? Not just the ones who are professional, but the ones who are volunteering to care for their families. Well, they're being extra careful in this day and age. Because they're so afraid. Their biggest fear is that they're going to contract this thing and they're going to bring it and they're going to hurt the very ones that they're trying to care for. How can we encourage them? Because their biggest fear is interaction, right? And they don't want that. That's not wise. But again, it's about picking up the phone and making a call. It's about sending a card, and it's just about sending a simple text that I was praying for you today because I can only imagine how hard this season is for you. You think about our teachers, starting back. Whether it's wearing, face shields or masks and trying to manage all this stuff and make sure everything's sanitized and all this. I mean, just all this on top of doing one of the hardest jobs is just teaching in general, right? And just developing our young people. So all of this is happening. And so are we taking the time then also to think about those people and being mindful of those teachers and those administrators that are making decisions that none of us want to make? I mean, I know what it feels like to make decisions for us, right? And so those decisions that that it doesn't matter what you do, what you decide, there's going to be a percentage that are going to not like what you decided. And there's going to be another side that's going, oh yeah, and then there's that middle that it doesn't matter what you do. They're going, I wish you'd have been more strict. I wish you'd have been more lenient. And so you're never going to make everybody happy. Are we praying for those? Are we encouraging those? Are we just assuming, well, they know we love them. They know we care for them. And in this climate, right? Thankfully in Nacogdoches, not so much, but think about our police officers and thinking about thanking them and appreciating them and valuing them. And think about the real racial injustice that really is happening, because there's some of that does happen in our society, in our world. And so are we reaching out just to have a conversation? And we talk about these connections. Are we just trying to listen, or are we just, I don't agree. I don't want to hear it. I don't value you. Church, we are called to be united and not let the world divide us. And we better come to a place where we genuinely can say, I don't care who you vote for. I don't care where you live, what choices you make. But you know what? We better be able to say, I love you. I love you. Because whether we accept it or not, there's people that are voting on different aisles that we're going to be sharing heaven. Do we get that, right? And whatever happens, God's already seen it. And He's going to see us through. So when we talk about faith over fear, it's not just about faith over fear in this virus and this season. It's about faith over fear of whatever's going to happen that I can't control. So that loving and making a connection, it's about loving people that sometimes we don't agree with and sometimes we don't understand. And then finally, love through investing time. One of the, it's still a couple times that I was able to go to Haiti. There's one thing that really stood out to me in each of those visits was during the VBS kind of portion of our visit with them. There was something so simple. You think that, well, you got to develop all this stuff because, our kids in America, we've got to entertain, and and that's just part of it. But for there's not a TV on every wall, there's not a phone in every pocket and all these such things. So it's so simple. And so what surprised me is that what they really wanted, they had this coloring sheet, and they probably have colored that same sheet, right? That same drawing and that same outline hundreds of times. However many groups come through, they probably get the same stuff, I would imagine. But either way, what they were interested in wasn't coloring and keeping everything in between the lines. That was not their biggest concern. Their biggest concern was as they were coloring and as they were drawing, as they were looking up and making sure that you were watching them do whatever it is that they were doing. Someone has said, and it's cheesy, but it fits, right? How do you spell love to a kid? T-I-M-E. There's no substitute for time. There's no substitute for attention. Are we making time for especially those who need our care and need our support and need our encouragement? And are we taking the time to not just ask God who you want me to love today, but are we actually doing it? It's one thing to hear Him say, love them, have a conversation with them. Be educated, learn a little bit. What's happening around you? There's a whole other thing to do it. The last thought is love everyone until they ask why. And I think that's the most powerful part in all of this. Is that Jesus, in verses 17 and 18, Jesus asked 3 questions. And I believe He's asking these questions filled with sadness. I want you to kind of look at it from that perspective. He says, were not 10 cleansed? Right? So this one comes back. And He said, weren't there 10? He knew it, right? These are rhetorical questions. And then the second question is, where are the 9? So there's one of you, and He wasn't overlooking this one. He was just saying, I healed 10. I know what happened. I know I shot the power out. I know what happened. So why is there only one? Where are the other 9? And was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? I think it wasn't that Jesus had an agenda, right? That as we think of agendas. His agenda was pure. There was no strings attached to His healing because, understand, these other 9 that didn't come back to praise Him and thank Him and find out who He was and why He did it, it wasn't like He re-zapped them with leprosy, right? That didn't happen. They stayed healed. They got to go back with their families. And they got to think about what this guy did for them. But what this one got that the other 9 missed out on is really what Jesus wanted to offer. That it wasn't just loving the lonely just to be there for them and to change their life and let them get back to their jobs and get back to their families and their routine, their life. But it was about, I want to change not just this side of eternity, but I want to give you something that's going to last forever. Because this healing is only temporarily. Because eventually you're going to die. Eventually you're going to pass away. So what I want to take is heal, and I want to give you life not just here, but I want to give you life there. Kent Hughes says this. He says, there's a deadly problem here. God was not the center of their gratitude. Only the foreigner, the Samaritan, gave praise to God. The other 9 were so earthbound. They were so like the shrewd manager and the rich man of the preceding parables, and that they missed the spiritual dimension altogether. Vague gratitude to divinity was not an adequate response to what happened. And here's the big point I think he points out is Christ wanted their hearts. Now mind you, was Jesus moved and stirred? Did He want to give them and restore them their earthly lives and their earthly status? Of course He did. That was a big part of what He found joy in that. But what He also focused on was, will they come and find out why I did it? I want to give them more than just the physical healing. I want to give them more than just their physical needs and their life and their breath. I want to give them eternal life. Vance Abner said, He says, our biggest problem in church today, and this is many years ago, but I think it relates here today, is the vast majority of Sunday morning Christians who claim to have known the Master's cure and who return not at other times to thank Him by presence, prayer, testimony, and support of His church. In fact, the whole Christian life is one big thank you. So let's think about it like that. My life is a thank you, or either a no thank you to God for what He's done for me. There is not one person seated here today in person or watching online today that hasn't received blessings from God. How do I know that? Because I know that everyone that is here, as far as I can tell right now, and as far as those watching online, is alive. Got a deep breath. You have people that love you and that care for you. You have your needs met. We do truly, I believe that we truly do live in the best nation on the planet. I believe that God has blessed us greatly. And He is truly the source of every good thing that we have. And so here's the thing, and what Vance is saying, is that if we just come to church or watch church, if we see that as, okay, that's my thank you to God, I showed up or I logged in. If that's it, then what he's saying is we're no different really than those other 9. That we've just taken the blessing from God. We've taken it from Him. We've taken that good, and we just kind of, okay, well, I'm on with my life now. I believe that was the biggest thing for Jesus as well, is, okay, I want to give you more than that. And the only way that you get more from God is to spend more time with God and to be more aware of what He's trying to do in and around you. So the challenge is not just to keep coming and to keep watching. The challenge is to be the church. The challenge is to do what Jesus did and be who Jesus was. That's the challenge. And when we as the church begin to live as if we're writing out a thank you, a virtual thank you, a real life thank you back to God, and every moment is an opportunity to say, God, thank you. Thank you. I'm sharing my faith with this person because I want to thank you for saving me, and I know that you can save them. I'm encouraging this person because you encourage me. You've allowed and sent people to encourage me. I'm contributing because you've met every need that I have. I'm part of this because along the way, if we were raised in church, someone sacrificed their time, someone sacrificed their finances, someone sacrificed whatever to help me get to this place in my life. So, all of us have been touched by God. Will we be the 9 who just, you know what, thanks, but not even a thanks. Just on with our life. Are we truly going to be this one that not just this once comes back to Jesus, but on a daily basis comes back and says, I want more. Not the physical stuff, but change me. Because what you did for me on the outside, I need a whole lot more work on the inside. Will you bow your heads with me? God, I love you. I thank you for your goodness. I thank you for your grace. I thank you for your healing power as well. You not only possess the power to heal us physically, to help us work through whether it's addictions or whether it's bitterness and old scars that we are carrying around with us. Whatever it is that you can remove and you can change. God, we truly have faith that you can do whatever it is that you choose to do. And so therefore, our faith is not just for you to heal us and remove this COVID and this season to be just fast forward so we can get back to some normalcy. But God, we trust that Whatever you're doing now, we're thankful for. Even if our prayers aren't answered the way that we expect them, we trust you. And whatever you've done for us, God, help us to live our life as if every moment we're saying thank you. Every moment we are grateful, because every moment is truly a gift from you. If you're here this morning or you're watching and you don't know Jesus as your personal Savior, and give that opportunity really quickly. If you just want to invite Jesus into your life, because that's the true miracle, I just encourage you to just lift your hand. I'd love to pray that prayer with you. Anyone here today?